All right. So hello, everybody, and welcome to
Annie, do
today's.
you want to let everybody in from the waiting
Oh,
room?
okay. So hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines, and I'm the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, located in sunny Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other CE opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation, and as always, we appreciate your honest feedback. Today's webinar is focused on the transformative power of participating in organizations outside of your library. We've assembled a panel of library workers in Idaho to speak to you today who've gone beyond their shelves, who've joined networks that have empowered them to become leaders, advocates, and change makers in their libraries and in the field at large. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Jennifer Redford, Youth Services Consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Annie. Before we get to the panelists, I did want to share sort of the little seed that sprouted this idea and why we're here today. So I'm a youth services consultant at the Idaho Commission for Libraries. I've been here for about 6 years. Prior to that, I worked at Boise Public Library for about 10 years. And in my time at public libraries, I had the chance to serve on the Idaho Library Association board and in some different committees and in those capacities, and work with people who later became my colleagues at the Commission for Libraries. I was on SPLAT, which is the Special Library, or sorry, what does SPLAT stand for? Special Library Projects Action Team.
Special Projects Library Action
Special
Team.
projects. Thanks, Annie. Annie, thank you. Annie facilitates SPLAT now, but that experience working outside of my regular duties in libraries and really building my network helped me uh, kind of go to the next level in my career and in my practice in libraries. It was really impactful for me. And now at the commission, I have the chance to serve on other committees, work on nationwide grants. I'm the state representative for the Collaborative Summer Library Program, CSLP. So I get to work with folks from across the country. And in that work, I've been struck by what a missed opportunity it is that more Idaho folks aren't involved nationwide and in some of our statewide and regional organizations, because I know all of you have so much to offer and you're so creative and you're doing so much great work in your communities on that community level. And can see how the work you're doing would be beneficial to some of these larger organizations and that you have so much to contribute. And I also know the power of um, being part of these other organizations. It builds your network. It can really fill a bucket for you professionally and let you work on passion projects or projects of special interest. And um, so I wanted to get a panel together of folks from around Idaho who have had successful experiences working in outside organizations, just so that we can talk about what the impact of that is and maybe give all of you a roadmap um, to participating in some of those organizations. So with that, I'm going to go around and ask we have 3 panelists today. We have Audra Green, who is the Strategic Initiatives Manager for the Meridian Library District. For just a few more weeks. I hear she's moving on, but we'll take her while we can get her. Gabby Stoller, a Youth Services Librarian, also at the Meridian Library District, and Mary DeWalt, who's the Director of Ada Community Library. So I'm going to have each of them go around and talk a little bit about their role at the library and some of the organizations that they have participated in. So let's go ahead and start with Audra.
You unmute and being the not really overachieving, but I do have some slides because I've talked about this before. So we share that. All right. Oh, I don't have the slideshow part going. Everyone see that? Cool. One thing that I really like to start off when we think about kind of getting outside the library is how do we measure the immeasurable? If anyone's been near me for a little bit, you've heard me talk about there's a woman named Eleanor Ostrom, and she was the first female to get a Nobel in economics and also the first non-economist to get a Nobel in economics because she was really trying to measure public good. And I think a lot of that relates to working with service orgs, dealing with, thinking about embedded librarianship and trying to figure out some of those things that are really hard to measure. And participating in outside organizations can really help us understand our community better. And I know for us at Meridian, it's opened a lot of new pathways and opportunities. So what we did when the outreach team was formed 10-ish, 11-ish years ago, we had kind of every manager sit on different service orgs. We haven't stayed with them all because it's really important to assess and see what's actually working and not working over time. But these are some of the ones we've worked with. And it's just a chance for us to get out and embed ourselves with a lot of folks in the community that want to do good work, but don't always quite know what the community might really need. So it can really be a two-way street in a lot of ways. So these are the service agencies and not necessarily other orgs. We've also worked with the chamber. And I know Gabby and Mary are going to talk about some of those other folks. So an embedded librarian is someone who really kind of works on building those relationships. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today too is the time and patience that it takes to build those relationships and the payoff that can happen from that. So it's helping spread the mission. It's a lot of doing direct contact and meaningful assistance outside. And there's often an economic advantage. Whether we like it or not, that's what we have to think about is a lot of our fiscal impact. And that's also what's going to resonate with boards and city councils and a lot of our other decision makers that we are working with. I think about the time and energy that it takes to sometimes sit on those boards. And it does take staff time, and it does it can have an impact maybe on the front desk, but the long range, long-term strategic thinking can really come into play. So this is what I wanted to show you all today is some of the payoff we've had at Meridian that we've been really lucky. Up in the corner there is our little tiny library, which is in the parking lot of the South Y. After 2 unsuccessful bond measures where we were going to try and build an actual library out there, we weren't really able to make it happen. But we were able to, through our relationship committed to the Hill, which is with Meridian Parks and Rec and the YMCA and the West Ada School District, as well as the City of Meridian, and our work SWAC. I think I have mentioned one of the boards. SWAC is the Solid Waste Advisory Council. Meridian has one of those. And they were able to secure a grant for the shipping container that then became our tiny library, which is our early learning vessel. The other one is Unbound. That picture is our original Unbound, which was just kind of a testament to us sitting both with the Chamber and Meridian Development Corporation and having representation with those outside entities. We knew we wanted to do something in downtown Meridian. We knew we couldn't really afford it. They had an empty bank. They rented it to us for $1. We were able to make some things happen, and it's now come into a full, we now have a different Unbound still in downtown. We were able to purchase a building and make it happen, but we were able to do it much cheaper to begin with because of that opportunity that working with the Meridian Development Corporation and the Chamber provided. These are just some other examples of us kind of getting out of the community. There's working with Safe Routes to Schools and trying to do a lot of co-location. The bikes, we used to check out bikes. That was through a grant with the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. Oh, here's another example. Rotary sponsored a lot of our kits. So they were able to provide a lot of the seed funding for a lot of things. I'm a member of Kiwanis, who has not only been a fiscal sponsor with a lot of our summer reading and summer mailing, but they were the seed beginning money for our very successful Tales by Mail program that we now continue to do. And we are able to mail books to kids' homes all summer long. And I'm sure Gabby will probably talk about some of those connections as well. So us kind of getting out there, some of the takeaways, you may not always have a lot of those service agencies in your neighborhood or your community. I recognize that I'm in the Treasure Valley, so we do have a lot of other opportunities, but there are churches, there are, what are the service agencies that are in your organization? I also want to give a shout out to community schools. If you're not familiar with the community schools model with United Way, they just got a federal grant to really push it out statewide across Idaho. And so you might be getting a community school in your area. The big takeaways are really embedding ourselves to make those connections and develop relationships. But it does require dedication. It does require a lot of long-term strategy and that commitment to community and patience, but it can be really worth it. These are just some other examples that we have that are kind of close to us. But again, I'm in a pretty populated area, so we do kind of have opportunities to look around. And yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing, stop share. And then I don't know, Jen, if you wanted to kick to someone or if you had any questions
Sure.
right
Can you
away.
mention really quickly your work with ABOS too?
Oh, thank you. Yes. If you're not familiar with the Association of Bookmobile and Outreach Services, they are a national organization that works a lot with this. They used to be just a bookmobile organization, and they have also recognized how important it is to redefine what working with your community means. And I'm on, thank you, Annie. I'm on the board of that, and they are also probably one of the most helpful listservs that are out there. So I'm not always the biggest listserv fan, but the ABOS listserv really has been one that is very beneficial. They are kind, and if you have an idea that you're stewing about and you don't quite know how to present it to your colleagues or your board or your leadership, then throwing it out to ABOS is a great organization of people all across the country, from tiny little towns with a one staff person to really, really large systems. And they will share all of their examples. And I do know in a few years, their conference will be in Reno. So we can get some more people locally. And they do have a virtual conference too option. So if you ever get a chance to attend that. And I'll give a shout out to the commission's first time grant. But ABOS does a lot of thinking strategically about how to do a lot of good in your community and not just on the role of the library. So how to work together with different agencies.
Awesome. Thanks, Audra. All right, Gabby, do you want to talk a little bit about your work at Meridian and some of the organizations that you've worked with as well?
Sure. Thank you, Jen. And I'm also going to apologize, or not so much, as we all know, with working from home. I am also a mom to a 3-year-old who is very much wanting to work herself right now. So if you end up seeing a child, that is going to be me. I also have street sweepers outside. So it's what happens with working from home. So I'm the youth services librarian at the Meridian Library District. I've worked at Meridian for 12 years, and I have actually been very fortunate. Before my role, Audra was actually my boss, and Audra really really impressed upon me this embedded librarianship. And if we want to know community need, we have to be where the community is. And so when I transitioned out of outreach, which I just left a department, the mindset never leaves you. I became the youth services librarian at the Meridian Library District, and it had been a little while since Meridian had one. And I really wanted to see, what does our community need? And so that has kind of formed my involvement with a lot of things. One that I encourage a lot of people to become more familiar with is I serve with Idaho Battle of the Books, which has been really, really great because as a youth services librarian, I really want to know and work with I really want to know more about what the school librarians need and are doing. And so it's been really great, not just because it's not just Treasure Valley, it is statewide. And so I have gotten to meet other librarians thank you, Annie, for putting in the link. I've gotten to meet people from up north and Eastern Idaho and kind of talking about forming lists, but also knowing what are they going through. We know that not just public librarians are going through a tough time, school librarians are as well. So what are they experiencing? What backlash are they having? And then how can we help and be there for them? I have really, really enjoyed getting to be involved with them. And it's kind of furthered my desire to really work with our school librarians in general. So I'm in the West Ada School District. And as Audra mentioned, one of the embedded things that we did before COVID was previous librarians went to their librarian meetings and was able to share what's going on at the public library, and we could take things back. And so we're constantly figuring out how can we be assisting, because we're all in the same mission. It's books, increasing literacy with kiddos. Another thing that I am really passionate about is, again, that early literacy. And so I am very involved with ILA's Early Learning Action Committee, which I encourage everybody, if you just want to know more of kind of like what's going on across the state with early literacy, go to these meetings. We have them, they're open meetings every other month. And we talk about trends. We talk about what we're seeing in our libraries. There can be an overarching topic. One time we wanted to talk about 1,000 books before kindergarten, because across the state, they're wanting to know that. And so it is a really, really great just sitting in and then being more involved, which I will give a plug for. The Early Learning Action Committee is actually having a pre-conference at ILA. And so I encourage you to attend if you want to know more all about early literacy and different ideas. And then nationwide, I have been involved with ALSC, which is Association of Library Services for Children. And I have loved it. In fact, thank you to ICFL and the First Time Conference grant. I just returned on Sunday from their annual conference and their institute, which is biannually, which was in Denver, and it was an amazing conference. But one thing that was very overwhelming is I got told by a lot of people, we never see people from Idaho that often, and they're not that involved. And we want to hear from places in the state. And I kept hearing that from a diverse bookfinder. I heard that from all over. And so I think it was really, really telling that they want Idaho on this stage. I have been serving on their underserved children and their caregivers committee. I actually just did a presentation about trauma and how trauma impacts kids across the country, and how are we that safe space? Which also goes very well, Audra. I don't know if you talked about, Audra does Hope Conquers Aces, which is another, I didn't think you did, which is another great one as well. And so getting to be with these national organizations, I feel has been very fulfilling as well, because a couple things, you can debunk the myths about what Idaho is, but also you get to stand in solidarity. I can't tell you how many times when people asked me this past weekend, where are you from? And I said, Idaho. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And how can we support you? And so that's just been a few that I have been working on, and how I've grown now. ALSC, they're like, we want you still doing more. We want Idaho a seat at the table. And that's what I encourage people. You don't know that people want a seat for you until you try to put your foot in the door and you discover there's been a place for you all along. So, and then Jen, I'll pass it over to you again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, Mary, can you tell us about your role at the library and some of the many, many, many organizations that you have been involved with over the years?
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. I was having trouble on my laptop, so I'm on my phone now. Hopefully it'll work. So thanks. Yes, I actually started, well, I'm with Ada Community Library, which is in the Boise area, Treasure Valley, and came here in 2001 as the children's coordinator, and then became director in 2003. So it's been a long journey. And prior to that, I was actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was working for Milwaukee Public Library. And that's where I started connecting. It's interesting though, when I was in Milwaukee, and I started at the library while I was still in library school and became a member of ALA at the student rate, and have been a member ever since. So it's like 30 some years probably with ALA. And ALA really kind of opened my eyes to the library world in general. But ALA is giant. It's, you know, if you attend an ALA conference, it's almost overwhelming sometimes because it's all library types. It's, usually in a giant conference center. It's a great experience, but it does seem a little overwhelming. And so while being a member of ALA, I also joined PLA, which is the Public Library Association. And PLA conferences feel a little more controlled, and they are a great resource for public librarians because they're so focused. And even if you can't make the conferences, PLA, the listserv, there's a lot of sort of practical information, as they were just talking about with like the ABOS listserv. It's great to get information on that level nationally, though. So ALA, PLA, and then when I moved here, I immediately became involved with ILA and PNLA, which is the Pacific Northwest Library Association. And PNLA actually was a great experience for me. I immediately, well, some of you, I don't know if you know Suzanne Price, she used to work for Boise Public Library. She wrangled me the minute I arrived practically to be vice president of PNLA. And my very first year here in Boise, I had to plan a conference for PNLA. And it was an immersive situation where I just, jumped in both feet and was able to really connect with a lot of people from across the region. And so PNLA is Alaska, British Columbia, Alberta, Washington, Oregon, Montana, and Idaho. And so it's just a great, diverse group of people. And again, the conferences are super helpful. And it's really an interesting perspective because you're getting that Canadian perspective as well as the US, and sharing ideas and things. And so PNLA, I do highly recommend. I know PNLA, I also was deeply involved in something PNLA offered for a long time called the Leadership Institute. And this is an opportunity, and we really tried to focus on rural librarians, but it was also challenging, of course, because it's a week-long institute, kind of an immersive, facilitated opportunity. And while it's super useful for rural librarians who are otherwise isolated, it was also challenging, I know, for them to be able to get away. So we were able to reach quite a few, but mostly it was a lot of city libraries who sent staff. But we ran that for, oh gosh, probably it was biennial. So we probably had 8 of them, every other year for a long period of time, and reached a lot of people. And the great thing about that was it developed a network and people stay connected, even to this date. It started way back in 2001 or whatever. And to this date, people still keep in touch and share information and, just enjoy each other on a personal level, which is great. And the other nice thing is we've really noticed that cohort graduates from PNLA leads have since moved on into leadership roles of either, a department coordinator, children's coordinator, or director or assistant director. But even if they didn't, the core of PNLA leads was to lead from any position. And so what we found is a lot of people who attended that are so much more empowered now to feel confident that, if they're, middle of their organization, they really can make a difference. And so I feel pretty proud of that. And I hope it has been on hiatus because there were some logistical challenges, but I do hope that returns someday and more Idahoans have an opportunity to take advantage of that. So ALA, PLA, PNLA, ILA, of course. And I will, thanks for the plug for the conference, because that's what I'm deeply involved with right now. It's happening in a couple of weeks. And again, that's a wonderful opportunity to network. And then I have dabbled in the AS, Association for Small and Rural Libraries, kind of put those letters together. I was able, through an ICFL grant, to attend one of those conferences. I think it was in Fargo. It was a fabulous experience. And so that, and I know we have Sherry Sheeline from Donnelly is now the VP or president, I can't remember which one, but it's just wonderful that we're going to have representation in that because it's a really great organization. Again, kind of like PNLA, where it's a little more focused, but it's even more tangible to people working in small and rural libraries and tribal libraries. And it's just fabulous. So that is highly recommended. And even if you can't, make it to the conferences, just being able to connect through that is great. So I've dabbled in that. I've got staff involved in ABOS now. I'm not personally involved, but there are just so many opportunities out there. I think I'll stop now.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks.
Yeah, shout out to ARSL, Arsol,
Yes.
which is Sherry from Donnelly got involved on the committee level a long time ago, has been very active in it, and was just elected vice president. And so she's like, their structure is she will be moving into the president role in the following year. So very excited about that. Go ahead, Audra.
Thanks. Some of the things that Gabby and Mary mentioned also reminded me of the importance and value of going to non-library conferences too, because it can be a really big two-way street. One of the things Gabby mentioned, Hope Conquers ACEs, that I do, which stands for Healthy Outcomes with Positive Experiences over adverse childhood experiences. But the main brunt of that work is through the Idaho statewide Idaho Children's Trust Fund. And I know that quite a few of us at Meridian have had the chance to get involved with Idaho AEYC or NAYEC. There's the Strengthening Families Training Institute. So it's a really great chance to start connecting with the other service type providers in your community that are serving the same families that you're working with. So there's a lot of value of, another one that they changed the name, it's called Learn now, I think, but we used to be really heavily involved in Justice Alliance for Vulnerable Adults that used to just be in the Treasure Valley and is now statewide. And so that is another chance to really network and engage with those service providers so that they have that chance to hear what we offer as libraries, but also a chance for us to hear what their clients or patients or whatever format they're working in can really go through. And I also want to make a comment. Erin made a comment in the chat about the leadership program at PNLA. Also look and see if your community has a leadership program. I know I went through the Chamber's Leadership Meridian program. I know Boise has, so some communities also have local leadership type programs where you can engage with other leaders in your community as well that are probably not library related. You might be the only librarian.
Go ahead, Gabby.
And I want to go off of what Audra said, but also what Mary said. One of the things that was really nice is I have actually never been to ALA, but going to ALSC, what is really nice, it is a smaller conference. So you actually feel it is very applicable to where you're at, because I know for me, like 13,000 people, I would just find so completely daunting and overwhelming, whereas ALSC was capped at 350. So that was really, really a good experience. But to what Audra said, being involved with the non-library organizations, it's really cool and also kind of like sad almost in a way when you go to a conference and you are like maybe the only librarian that is there. And libraries, as we all know, have so many connections in so many different places. One of mine that I find very beneficial with working with children, it is going to the early years conference that is done with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. That's an amazing conference. And thanks to ICFL, there are more librarians that go to that because you pay for us to go, which is a wonderful thing. But there's also so many people are surprised. Same with Idaho AEYC's Professional Development Institute. I remember going and I was the only librarian there. And that was really telling because, as a lot of us know, working with childcares and libraries, we think it seems like an obvious symbiotic relationship, but it's not. And so those are the little things, even in your day-to-day, that we encounter. Even if you think like in your role, like, oh, I can't really be involved in a big organization. Start small, because actually that can be even where you make the biggest impact. And there's not fees to be involved.
Mm.
But you can create a big difference there.
Yeah, if I can just jump in too, that just reminded me of a couple other, and Audra may remember the name of one of them, but I know I've attended, they're just it's not really a full conference, but it's a day-long gathering summit or something, from something like the Idaho Technology Council. They gather people together, and it's always good to have a library at the table of that. There's one that's held primarily for school personnel. I know Audra and I presented when it was in Sun Valley, and Audra, hopefully you remember the name, but it's again primarily intended for schools.
Yeah, it was the State Department of Ed, but I can't remember. It was actually, sorry, there's a train now, but it was their suicide prevention conference, but for educators.
Yeah, yes. And so again, it was super important that we were there to make that connection with libraries. And so there's a lot of those kinds of things that are happening Idaho-wide. They take place in different parts of Idaho, but jump into those whenever possible. And those are generally, free to attend. Some a little.
Just last week was the Idaho Out of School Networks Power Up Summit. Thanks for putting the link for ION in there, Audra. And several librarians from around the state traveled to that one. I sit on ION steering committee, valuing the importance of that libraries play in out of school time. And that group is always looking for subcommittee members. So if you have an interest in policy around out of school or communication or STEM, there are opportunities to get involved on a committee level. So it's not necessarily that like board leadership level. And ION can connect you with other people around the state. ION also hosts regional roundtables in the spring. So those are free to attend. They're usually full day or half day, kind of depending on what you can schedule in. They usually include some professional development and also a chance for you to meet with other people in your state who are involved in out of school. So again, that's another opportunity that can come to you and that you can, where you can connect with people.
And that, sorry, just reminding me, there's just so many.
So many.
So Ready Idaho is it's an early childhood education group that represents all of Idaho. And there are cohorts across the state. They're called collaboratives, where it's generally an early childhood learning center combined with, sometimes local businesses. And generally there are libraries involved. In some cases there are not yet, and that's what I'm hoping to spark. So Ready Idaho is always looking for, we're pretty well represented here in the Treasure Valley, and we do have representation, but it's more like the United Way of Eastern Idaho, or we don't have a lot of library representation from North and Eastern Idaho. So if you're attending and you're in those areas, hit me up and I'll give you information on how you can pop in. Mostly we just have online meetings to share information, but there are other opportunities to do this too. And it's Ready Idaho through IAEYC. And again, it's just a large group of people, all kind of focused on the same goal. So
Go ahead, Audra.
I just think what's really resonating as we keep dumping a lot of stuff into the chat is when we're really thinking about our patrons and our community, they're all accessing so many of these other orgs. And so seizing those opportunities where we are working with the other orgs and families that are serving our same folks. Like if I think about it from like the Java or Idaho AYC or childcare standpoint, we're all serving the same families. When I think about it from the Kiwanis, Rotary, some of those orgs, they're wanting to also help, but they often don't know where to begin. Because they're not as engaged with the community as we are. And so bridging those things as well can really help us all. It's all community oriented, everything that we're talking about, and finding those other service providers and working together so we can also just be more efficient and help each other out too.
Definitely. Well, let's talk a little bit about like some practical things. I want to talk about how we actually make those connections initially and get involved. Gabby, since you're like our most frontline person on the call, can you talk about what your experience was like just getting involved with organizations on the local level and also like the ALSC stuff? How did that go?
Sure. Well, so it's really interesting, right? Because I do see like other people from Meridian on this call and it's frontline. And, so that's a good thing, but it's kind of like, I know for me, I was in this. Should this be a director? Should it be a manager? Do I really have the time? What can I do? But here's the other thing, because we're on the front line, I think, and it's going to sound so dumb, just ask. You get to hear the things that the community or you see gaps, right? Of like what your interactions are, where there's a need. You can have the patron come in who wants to put up about their organization's free event, and you're making sure it doesn't violate your display policy. Can you really put it up and advertise? But then you start to have a conversation, and then where you're like, oh, I want to know more about that myself. I'm a glutton for punishment in that I love, if I could probably do school all the time without having to pay for it, I probably would, because I love learning. And so for me, that's kind of how I've gotten involved with some of my organizations. Is I want to learn more because I want to serve my community more. And so there are things that you can't do. There are things that, you know, because it is cost more, I have to either choose to do on my own time because I enjoy it. And there's that fine line of what can you do in your role, but also what's professional development that you do outside of it. But you just ask, and that's how I've gotten involved. Idaho Battle of the Books. I'm fascinated with books. We were working on it. There was a hole because a staff member was leaving, and I'm like, I'll fill it. I'll work and see if, I'm a good fit. So that's does that help answer that question, Jen?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe Audra or Mary, you can talk about what it's like to be in that admin role and how you would carve out time for the people you're managing. Can either of you speak to that?
Sure, I can hop in and then Mary can add to it. I know for us, when we first started this journey about 10 years ago, it was just primarily managers and supervisors. And a lot of it came down to we didn't have enough staff. And also there's that, I kind of put it in the chat, that exempt versus non-exempt. So sometimes the exempt just have more of that flexibility to show up to events and keep showing up to things at weird hours and not having to deal with time cards. But because of that, seeing that value and worth in it, then we started building it into the staffing models for the staff. So like the same way that you're looking at a front, like this is how many desk hours someone needs, this is how many program hours someone needs. We also started putting in committee work and going to conferences and building it into our staffing model, because it does cost staff time, but it has a lot of value to it. But we had to take that time and energy to actually build it in to see how can we keep libraries open and functioning and running, and also showing up, because that's where a lot of the payoff is when you continuously show up, there's a lot more value added to it. So over time, we've been able to trickle it down to librarians and associate librarians, and we've now got outreach embedded almost in every position now at the library. But it took a lot of spreadsheets with staffing models. And putting the professional development budget, because some of these things do have membership fees. So that is a factor as well.
Yeah, I can just say, I mean, we haven't really taken on this embedded concept that Meridian has, but we do definitely encourage our entire staff to get involved in something simple, on their own kind of interest and time ability level. And we do try to spread that around. We try to make a point. We have 60 staff, from pages, circulation aides, all the way up to me, and different, admin staff, a lot of frontline staff, obviously, and 4 branches, one really tiny. So that one would almost equate to a lot of the smaller libraries across the state. And that one is challenging to be able to carve time for them. We fortunately are in a position where if someone from that branch, which is Hidden Springs, wants to attend something, we can send help from a different branch to cover. Now, if you're in, independent library, you obviously don't have that luxury, although I really wish we could figure out some way. I'd be happy to send staff to cover for Filer if we can figure out how to crack that nut. But so yeah, time, and as Audrey said, to keep the library open while you're taking advantage of this is really a challenge. But we definitely try, and I think we more often seek out opportunities where they can take a webinar from the building or attend a meeting from the building and just carve out that little bit of time, more so than actually going away, because that's a little easier. Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, I like that. Two kind of different models. One where kind of all in, and another where it's really more kind of employee directed. But I really appreciate when folks from your library show up at things, and they're just as engaged as folks at Meridian. So there's lots of different pathways to it. I want to highlight Julie's note from the chat. Julie works at the Lapway Library, which is part of Prairie River Library District up in north central Idaho. And she says, I've worked in libraries for 30 years and I've been encouraged to be on different boards and committees by supervisors. And she's had a few different supervisors in her time. I've been on regional ILA conference committees several times and even co-chaired conferences. It's very rewarding and fun to do different things within the library world. I'm currently on the boards of our local Boys and Girls Club, and she's part of her local collaborative too. Julie's a great resource for her community too. You know, whenever anybody contacts me and wants to do something in the Lapway area, I always direct them to Julie. And it's really great to know that she is so connected within her community through the various work that she's done over years. It's not something that really happens overnight, but over the course of your career, you build up these relationships. All right, we have some time left. I do want to let the audience know that we're going to reserve about the last 10 minutes for your questions. So in that time frame, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. So is there any outcomes for participating in these outside organizations or benefits that you've seen that have maybe surprised you or have really impacted your library work?
Besides money?
Besides,
I mean, that has been a big one. I mean, I know that sounds very fiscal and admin brained, but I think about like our really successful Tales by Mail and how it started off with Kiwanis giving us $500 the first year. And we were able to, after the first 5 years, get enough data to apply for ESSER grants and get $30,000 grants. And so, and I think this is maybe not totally answering your question, but it's an example, Jen, is because I'm on the board of Kiwanis, and they've been working for years providing school supplies for the school district, and that's great, but they didn't really have an avenue to talk to the schools about what they actually needed. And so I was able to be that conduit to be like, they don't actually need pens and pencils. They actually need underwear and pads and food, you know? So being able to like shift the dynamic for really understanding what our community members need, I think is really important. And I will also say when Meridian a few years ago, when we were in front of the county commissioners for us to be dissolved as a library district, it was the chamber and it was the mayor and it was a lot of these embedded orgs that showed up for us and testified in our favor.
Yeah, I think it's the connections that are most important. The opportunities to meet people and then be able to kind of tangentially use those connections for other ways. For one just quick example is I was at a chamber. I'm also on the Boise Chamber Education and Workforce Committee, and we have regular meetings there, and that's another great opportunity. But I was at a recent meeting and a new guy came, sat next to me, and so we started chatting. And he is going to be speaking at our conference now, because as we talked, he's kind of his focus is on courage within organizations. And I thought, oh my gosh, if any organization right now or any institution needs courage right now, it's libraries. And so I asked him if he'd be interested in being one of the keynotes at the conference, and so he is. And so that's just minor example, but there are many ways where you make a connection through one of these opportunities, and then somewhere down the line, it's like, oh, I remember I can talk to that person about helping out with X project. So that's just really important.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say as well. It's really that connection piece. I had an instance this past weekend while I was at ALSC that blew me away. I was talking with the gal from We Need Diverse Books, and I had written a grant for books. And, you know, I totally leaned into the I'm from Idaho, you know, my library was being dissolved. You know, I leaned into it. And the gal is like, I remember you. And first I was like, whoa, okay. So that's really cool that when you go for these things and working, people start to remember. And then she's like, I have a question for you. I keep seeing all these things, like, especially like with rural communities, what can we do as an organization? And I said, I don't even know if they know about us. And that led to a whole conversation about how rural Idaho, you know, a lot of them are one person libraries. We don't have great Wi-Fi. We don't have, you know, broadband is an issue. They don't have time to fill out these grants. And so we got this ball rolling, and she's like, I want to reach out to you when I get back and maybe talk with other people in Idaho about what can we do? Like, do we need a grant that targets just rural libraries and almost like a big brother, big brother, big sister program, and like a larger library that does have more resources, say like Boise or Meridian or Ada, we write an application on behalf of a library. And this was really cool that this conversation happened just by talking, and these connection pieces that are beyond me, they're beyond Meridian. Maybe we could get somewhere that impacts the whole state. I think that that for me is just one of the outcomes with being involved with things that I'm like, wow, the ripple effects truly go beyond what you anticipate.
Yeah, Gabby, that's one of the reasons I wanted to get all of you here. And I had invited a few more of your colleagues because we do have other people in the state who are involved with some of the national school library orgs and academic library orgs. Getting everybody on the same Zoom is a challenge. But, you know, I don't want anybody on this call to underestimate the power of your voice, because it's important, and people want to hear from you. But they can't hear from you if you're not on the committees, going to the meetings. You got to show up. And it's easier than ever to do things like that because of Zoom. A lot of committee work, for example, for CSLP, the Collaborative Summer Library Program, a lot of that work is done over email with just like a couple of Zoom meetings to sort of orient everybody and distribute work assignments for creating things like the manual, or toolkits for outreach, or weighing in on future themes and slogans, or some of the items that are available in the shop. All of that CSLP is a nonprofit. It's run by volunteers from around the country. And I know all of you have opinions about it because I read your summer reading reports, but you can also like be part of it and affect where the organization goes to. CSLP committee volunteer, the committee volunteer window is open now too through October 15th. So if anybody is interested in being on a CSLP committee, it's usually consists of, like I said, a few Zooms and lots of work over email. Here's the direct link to the committee stuff. So I chair the outreach committee, would love to have folks on board for that. So yeah, okay. Audra, Gabby, or Mary, before we turn it over to our audience for questions, do you have anything else to say or that you would like to share?
Just reach out if you have other questions or want to chat off this call at some point. I'm always happy to. And I'm still with Meridian until November-ish, but I'm only going to Boise State, so I'm not going very far. I'm still here.
And I would just say, yeah, we definitely need to hear the voices of our smaller libraries. You know, sometimes it feels a little like, you know, the larger libraries are running things, and we, or, you know, we're the only ones who have input, and the the smaller library input, and I know we've got a mix on this call, but it's super important to hear, even if it's just, dropping an email on a subject to the ILA board, or just, because we know you're doing the best work out there and you're super important, and thank you.
I think the same goes for frontline staff who are early, mid-career. You have a lot of important things to share, and getting involved in ILA is probably the lowest hanging fruit you can have. It's super easy to just email Mary and say, hey, I want to do something, and she will put you to work. And find a place for you, and it's a great entry point into getting started with other, and it's also a great way to connect with colleagues outside your library, which can be very rewarding. Those relationships are just so valuable. All right, audience, if you have any questions for us, please put them in the chat. And Annie, I know you've been listening to all of us too, so if you have any questions, let us know too.
Well, for balance, we've been talking about great things. Have there been any challenges to participating in these organizations that you feel are worth mentioning?
I mean, I would say a challenge is always time, for one thing. I mean, time and money seem like the obvious answers, right? But time can be hard because there's not enough time to do all the things. And it's also, especially for as a frontline staff, making sure I'm not overcommitted with these professional development things versus the daily in and running of a branch. So that's a challenge. And then, I mean, of course, there's drama. There's always drama. The more you know about an organization, the more you're like, I wish I didn't know some of these things, but that's life also. So
And I would add, I mean, over time, there's some that we have dropped because we just realized long-term the payout wasn't really as important, or maybe our values weren't really aligning the way we thought they aligned. So doing constant assessment, I think, is really important. And this is very much manager admin level hat, but making sure also that when you're sending staff out into the world, that they also feel safe and empowered to also do that. Like trying to think, I won't say the org because it was a very unique situation, but we had one person who was sitting on one org, and basically she kept coming back and she's like, all they do is drink and I don't feel comfortable. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair, and so we reevaluated that relationship, and we're not involved anymore. And so also making sure that staff kind of know what they're doing, but we also assess it, and that as we're sending staff out into these things, that they also feel empowered, and keeping those communication pieces open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and making sure that they feel comfortable putting up, their sort of borders, like how far they can go, because sometimes you can get just too immersed and want to take on too much, and you just have to keep that balance, maintain that.
Yeah, I want to highlight Rachel's question. Rachel works for the Community Library Network, which has seen a lot of transition over the last few years, and is not sure how to get started getting involved. We mentioned ILA. I will say, knowing a little bit more about your library situation, when you're in kind of an uncertain environment in your library, reaching toward relationships and kind of firming up relationships that are already there or should already be there, can be the place to start. So start with schools. Really, like, that is a natural partnership. Public library, school, get that relationship really firmed up. I know a lot of libraries in your area have really fantastic relationships with the state parks too, especially in your summer program. So work on deepening those. Maybe don't try something new, but try to really build a foundation that's already existing. And I think that will maybe branch out a little bit. And Julie has a really, I think, good question here, is when you're in those libraries where you're just kind of by yourself or the only person on desk, but you really want to attend Jennifer's lit chat, which Julie does go to a lot of those, or a Zoom. how do you get your supervisor or coworkers on board to support you? Go ahead,
Can I?
Gabby.
Well, I'll just say as somebody who would go to a manager or supervisor, because I am not that um by intentional design. I think if maybe making sure that your manager and supervisor knows like what your desires are and what you would like professionally. I know like as Audra being my boss for a while, you know, I would have conversations and be like, I really am wanting to grow in this area. Can we make the time? I think it's again, just as we talked about communication with the organization, I think it's important to make sure communication with managers and supervisors as well. Because maybe they don't know that you have an interest in something. And unless managers and supervisors want to support, especially free professional development. So that's my thought from a the non-manager side of it.
And I think I would add to it, and I know I can't speak for every manager out there, but I do value being a working manager, which means I should be able to go staff the desk when my staff want to do these things. I will say I've also seen the flip side of maybe a staff person who wants to do 25 hours of professional development. Like, no, that's just not possible. But really aligning it with the goals of that person, but also being sure that I can also step in and cover those roles too. I think that that's really important.
Yeah. And I think just making, if we're talking about the board, you know, and sort of an external stakeholder, making them aware of the value of these agencies and connection, you know, how your connection to this agency or institution can really benefit your community. And I think it should be a no-brainer.
As someone who sets up a lot of those Zooms, I will say that it is, we're just sort of guessing on days and times of to schedule things. So when Annie does her CE survey every year, fill it out and let us know the best days and time for things. Or just email anybody if it's an ICFL event and just say, hey, I really would like to come to this type of event, but I'm always on desk at the time you hold it. And trust me, we will bend over backwards to change it the next time.
Well, and
and make it work.
The fact that you record them so that people can access them at their leisure is so amazing. So
yeah.
I was going to say to that, Mary, I can't tell you how many times I sometimes register for something, hope I can do it. And then of course, what happens, there's a call out and you can't be there, but still you've signed up for the recording. You can still do it, I think is really important. So I know I appreciate all the recording ones for sure.
Well, any other questions from our audience? Okay, well, Audra, Gabby, and Mary, thank you for a great conversation. I had a whole list of questions I was going to ask you, but we didn't even get to most of them because we have all worked together on different projects for years now. And this is what happens when you are connected with your colleagues, is you just have these wonderful, inspiring, engaging conversations that you don't even need notes for. So I appreciate all your time. I appreciate all that you do for your libraries, for your communities, and to represent Idaho. And I will say, I hope that some of you listening out there, either live or on the recording, are inspired to sign up for a committee, sign up for a listserv, do what you can to practice embedded librarianship. And thanks, Audra, for the great slides on that. Because you do have a great voice, you have so much to offer and so much to say, and I really appreciate all that you all bring to the table. All right, thanks everybody.
Yay! Thank you so much for attending. I'm going to stop the recording now.